Hey guys, it's Miss Ghazali again with another video. Today I'm going to review while loops a little bit and then get into a new kind of loop called a for loop that you can also use in Python. But before we get into for loops, and by the way, I created a file and I called it forloops.py, so I would recommend you do the same just to keep track of all the different notes we'll be taking going forward. So let's begin by just kind of reviewing while loops. So let's begin with this problem. Let's write a while loop that prints numbers 1 through 10. Okay, pretty straightforward. We're still doing very basic things, by the way. These are all these problems can be categorized as basic coding problems. So to print numbers 1 through 10, we need to first begin with a counter. So you can actually initialize your counter to 0, but in this case, I would recommend we start at 1. And the reason for that is because we are trying to print 1 first. So why not start at 1 and see what happens? Okay, so we'll start with our loop. And the condition will be pretty easy because we know that we have to go up to 10. So we'll just do this. We'll do while count is less than, so you could do less than or equal to 10, or you could do strictly less than 11. Those are the same. So it's kind of a style preference, but I'm going to go with less than or equal to 10. So while count is less than or equal to 10, we're just going to print count. Okay, so we're printing the variable itself, and then we are going to increment our variable because we want it to print 1, then we want it to print 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, and so on until it reaches 10. So I think that should do it. Let's see. If we run this, we'll get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, let's say you started count at 0, right? What would happen there is you would probably, so if you start at 0, the first time that this loop runs, the first iteration, it's going to check if 0 is less than or equal to 10. That's true, and then it's going to print count, but count is at 0. So what you would want to do is actually add the 1 in here, and then that would work. Because if we don't do that, let's see what happens if we start count at 0. So if we start count at 0, it's going to print 0 through 10. So what we could do is count plus 1 and run that. That'll go to 11 though, so probably we can do strictly less than 10, and that should, yeah, that should fix the issue. Okay, but I don't really recommend you do this. I think it's better to just start your count variable at 1 because it just makes more sense since, you know, number 1 is what you want to print first. Okay, now if we wanted to do this backwards, there's a couple of different ways. So let's do the same thing but backwards. So write a while loop that prints numbers 10 through 1. Just 10 through 1. Okay, so again, we could start with our count, and we could say count equals 10, right? Because that's the first number we want it to print. And then while count, now it's going all the way down to 1. So instead of count being less than something, we'll say while count is greater than or equal to 1, because that's where we need to go down to. We could print count, and then we can, now instead of incrementing count, meaning increasing it by 1 like we did here, what we want to do is we want to count backwards. So we would just subtract 1 instead, right? So if I print this, if I run it, I should get 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which I do. Okay, so again, just two basic loops that you should understand, and again, these are very basic, so if you're having trouble with these, I would recommend you really review them line by line and try them out. because these are supposed to be very basic still. Okay, so let's move on to for loops. So for loops are a little bit more complex in Python, and they exist in other languages too, so for loops are not specific to Python. So let's begin with for loops, defining them. So with for loops, this is what you need. You need the for keyword, a variable name, the in keyword, and you know what, I'll put these in quotes so you know that these are keywords, because they sound kind of weird unless you realize that they are keywords. A call to the range function. Sorry, actually in Python we don't call them functions, we call them methods. With up to 3 integers passed to it. I'll explain that in a second. Okay, zoom out. A colon as usual, and then an indentation on the next line. So, you know, a couple of these are like colon and the indentation, those are just regular. We always do that with whether it's a while loop or a for loop. But there are some new things like the for keyword, the in keyword, and especially the range function. Okay, so let's just do a simple loop that prints someone's name a set number of times. So here is the problem. Write a for loop that prints a name, let's just go with 5 times. Okay, so let's see. Let's do this. Let's ask for user input. So name equals input, enter your name. Okay, and then here's how we would do this with a for loop. So for I in range 5, okay, print name. Now that's it, 2 lines, and this is gonna do what we want it to do. Let me show you. So let's say we run this. It's gonna say enter your name. So let's say I put Nick, and then as you can see, it printed Nick 5 times. Now that's because I asked for 5 times, but this can be any number you want. So if I put 10 and I run that, and I put Nick, it's gonna print Nick 10 times. If I do 2, it's gonna print Nick, or whatever name I type in twice, right? So that is actually, it looks a lot cleaner than a while loop. I'm sure you noticed that. Now, I can do this with a while loop as well. So I'm just gonna do the same thing. Before I explain the different parts of this, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do the same exact loop but as a while loop, just so you can see the difference. So let's see. Write a while loop that prints a name 5 times, and then I want you guys to kind of compare and see the differences. So here's my while loop. Now I need a counter variable, so I'm gonna go with count equals 0. Now you can start at 1, but I'm gonna start at 0 just because I'm used to that. And then I'm gonna do while. Actually, we should get input from the user first. So what is your name? Okay. So we want this while loop to happen 5 times. So I'm gonna say while count is less than 5. Now, strictly less than 5 will work because I'm actually starting at 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 5 times. Okay, so because I'm starting at 0, strictly less than 5 is gonna work. And I'm just gonna print name. Now I actually have to increment my counter variable. Otherwise, this will become an infinite loop, and we don't want that to happen. Okay, so let me run that, and you'll see, what is your name? Nick. And then it's going to print it 5 times, right? And whatever I change this to, that's how many times it'll print it. So if I do 2, it'll print it. If I put Joe, twice. Okay, so let's compare the 2 loops and see. So I have them kind of right here. I'm gonna uncomment that. Okay, so the for loop does a lot of things in one line. It kind of initializes your counter variable. So your counter variable in this for loop is called I. Now, I can call it something else. I could call it count, and that would be fine. But the default in Python or in any computer programming language is usually I or J. So you should probably get used to that. And so this counter variable is going from 0 to 4. So that's how this range function works. So this range function actually, it actually prints out numbers from 0 through 4. So it's any numbers up to the number that you put inside the range function. So if you put 5, it's going to go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. So it's not going to include this number right here. So basically what I'm trying to say is that I takes on the values 0 through 5, not including 5. So let me write that so you can have it. So I, which is a variable, will take on the values 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4. So it does not include the 5. Okay? So basically, what's going to happen is that for each I, for each value of I, I'm printing name. Okay? I'm going to comment this out now because I want to focus on this for loop. Okay? I'm going to bring it down here so we can just focus on the for loop. Okay? So I want to show you something else just so you understand this I value and what's happening. So I'm going to kind of copy and paste this, and then I'm going to change a couple of things. Forget name for a second and forget name in here. Let's just print I and see what's happening. Let's run it. Okay, take a look. So for I in range 5, I'm printing I, and so it's printing 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, just like I said, because I is taking on the values in range 5, and range 5 is 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, not including 5. So if I put 10, it's going to go from 0 to 9, because it's not going to include 10. Yes, so here it is, 0 through 9. So when you put a number inside the range function, it's basically going through all the numbers up to that number. Okay, so that's why if we put 5 in here, it's going to run from 0 through 4. Okay, so let's say we wanted to print, just like we did in the beginning of today's lesson, let's say we wanted to print the numbers 1 through 10 but using a for loop. So let's do that. So use a for loop to print numbers 1 through 10. Okay, so let's use I again. Let's get used to using I, and let's use our range function. So for I in range, now we want it to go up to 10, including 10, because we are trying to get it to print up to 10, right? So what we could do actually, we could put 10 in here, but keep in mind that if we put a 10 in there, we're going to get, so what numbers, I is going to take on values 0 through 9. So I will take on values 0 through 9, which is not really what we want because we want it to print 1 through 10. So if I end up just printing I, it's not going to give me what I want. Let's see. So here, I'm printing I and I get 0 through 9. Well, that's not good enough because the goal here is to print 1 through 10. So the easiest fix for that is, think about it. If it's printing 0 as my first number and 9 as my last, but my first number needs to be 1 and 10 needs to be my last, then the easiest thing to do is to just add 1 to I, and now I can have 1 through 10. Now see how easy that was? That literally took 2 lines of code versus my loop up here, which took 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of code. So if you think about it, the for loop is doing exactly the same thing as this while loop in 2 lines though. And the reason for that is because the range function is, the range method is very powerful. It allows us to loop through all these values quickly without having to use a counter variable. Okay, so now let's do the same thing but print the numbers backwards. So use a for loop to print numbers 10 to 1. Okay, so again, for I in range, now if we wanted to print this backwards, there are actually several ways to do this. Let me think about the easiest way to do this. What we could do is we can use our range function in a different way. So one way to use the range function is to just put in one number in there, but the range function actually can take one number, 2 numbers, or 3 numbers. So if we want it to go backwards, what we can do is put in 2 numbers, I believe. Let's see how this will work. I could do 10, 1. Okay. Let me see if this works. I don't remember. Okay, this didn't work. So actually, I think what we need to do is, our starting number is 10. Our stopping number is 1, and we need to go -1 increments or decrements. Okay, that works, but I have to change this to 0. Explain it in a second. Okay, yep. So when we put in 3 numbers in our range function, what happens is the first number is a start number. The second number is the stop number, not including that number, and the third number is what you want to increment or decrement by. Okay, so basically what I'm saying is, here I will take on values it's going to start taking on the value 10. It's going to go all the way to 0, not including 0, and it's going to go -1 each time. So basically I will take on values 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and that's because it's saying this third number is telling the range function to go down by 1 each time. Now this is interesting if we do this -2 and see what happens. If I run that, it's going to go down by 2's each time, so it would be 10, 8, 6, 4, and it would have to stop at 2 because 2 minus 2 is 0, and it's going to 0, but it doesn't get to 0. It doesn't include that second number. Okay, so I think it would be better to talk about the range function. Maybe I should have started with that, but I think that talking about the range function might help you understand the for loops better. Okay, so with the range function, if you have range 5, Okay, this actually, yeah, so this will go from 0 to 4, right? So it does not include the 5. Okay, how about if I do this? If I put in two numbers, if I put in two numbers like 12 comma 16, okay, that will go from, let's see, I think it will go from 12 up to 16, but not including 16. So this will go from 12 to 15. We could try it. So for I in range 12 comma 16, print I, let's see. So 12, 13, yeah, so I was right. So 12, 13, 14, 15. So this would be the start. This would be the stop, not including the last value. So first number is start. Second number is stop, not including that number. Okay? So if you have two numbers in the range function, it's going to start at the first number and stop at the second number, but not including that number. So right before, pretty much. Okay, and then we can use the range with three values. And the three values is what I showed you before, where it starts, stop, and increment or decrement value. So we could do this. We could start at 100, go all the way to 10, and decrement by tens. Okay, so this will go from, this will go from, let's see, 100 all the way down to, so if it's going down by tens, it's not actually going to reach 10 because it never reaches the second value. So it would go down to 20, I believe. Okay, let's try that. So 100 comma 10 comma negative 10. Run that. So yeah, take a look. 100, 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20. So the last value is actually 20. Okay, so the range function can be a little bit confusing. But basically what I want you to remember is that it can take on one value, two values, or three values. And depending on what you put in there, 1, 2, or 3 values, it's going to do something a little bit different. So if you're only putting one value, it's going from 0 up to that number. If you're putting two values, it's starting at the first number, stopping at the second number, not including the second number. And if you put in three values, it's starting at the first number, stopping at the second number, not including the second number, and then the last value is your increment or decrement. Now, it has to make sense. So for example, if I put in 10 here, so 100 to 10, and an increment by 10, I might get an error. Let's see. Sorry. No, so I don't get an error, but nothing happens because it doesn't make sense. How can you go from 100 to 10, but add positive 10 each time? So just make sure you're using this correctly. And if you ever forget how the function, how the range method works, just Google it. All these built-in methods are all online. You're not really expected to memorize them. Maybe memorize the major ones. And, you know, I have to admit, range is a major method because we use it in for loops, but everything is online. So if you ever forget how to use a certain built-in method, you can always Google it. Okay, so we'll experiment more with the range function. You know, I'll show you one more. So for example, for I in range, and by the way, you don't have to use I. Let me just prove that to you. So if I do J in range 5 to -1, -1. So think about what that's saying. Start at 5, go all the way to -1, not including -1, and subtract 1 each time, let's print j. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, so it stops at 0. Okay, and see, j worked, but the default value we usually use is I. It's the most popular variable to use. Let's see, what else? Let's write a more interesting for loop. Okay, write a for loop. Write a for loop. Give me a second. I'm trying to see what I want to try out. Okay, you know what? We're gonna stop here because I had one more loop that I wanted to show you, but I kind of want to leave it for next time because it's an interesting problem. So I'd rather leave that off for next time. So hopefully I didn't confuse you too much with the range function, but just watch the video carefully. You can rewind if some things were confusing to you. I'll probably do another video combining while and for loops and range and kind of practicing, maybe reviewing some things, but if you have any questions, let me know. For loop can be a little bit confusing. I think while loops and for loops can be slightly confusing, but the more you practice with them, the better you'll get. So again, if you have any questions, just comment and let me know, and I can always make more videos kind of expanding on certain things that you didn't understand, and then we'll go from there. All right, I'll talk to you guys later.